They called it a devil with a forked tail. And at first Japan didn't know whether to laugh at the shape or run from the fire. That line, laugh or run, is the hinge of this story. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning arrived over the Pacific like a creature from another world. Twin booms, a central cockpit pod, and a nose full of guns that delivered a brutal, concentrated punch. For the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces, the Lightning did not fit the mold of the fighters they had mastered. The first impressions mattered. They framed tactics, intelligence, and the way Japanese pilots would fight the rest of the war. The first time Japanese pilots saw a P-38, they filed reports that mixed amusement with unease. A twin-tailed oddity, some wrote in terse dispatches. Looks like an experimental plane, others noted. But those early sketches, puzzled, almost dismissive, hid a vital error. They judged the Lightning by silhouette, not by system. They didn't yet grasp what that twin-boom layout, 2 powerful engines with turbochargers, and a nose-mounted armament meant for combat at range and altitude. Why the surprise? Japan's air doctrine had grown around light, highly maneuverable fighters that won by turning and out-tricking their opponents. The Zero, the Ki-43, these were planes optimized for agility and range at the cost of protection and raw firepower. The P-38 was the antithesis in many ways. Heavy, fast, in a straight line, with redundancy and wide attack options. Its fighting philosophy was not to dance in a turning dogfight, but to control energy, close at speed, and hit hard from a distance. That difference would force the Japanese to rethink more than a few assumptions. Combat encounters made the lessons brutal and immediate. Early skirmishes in the Solomons and New Guinea taught Japanese pilots that the Lightning could shrug off damage that would disable a single-engine fighter. Twin engines meant you didn't necessarily die after one hit. Pilots who learned to approach a P-38 as a flying fortress, not invincible, but far tougher than the average Allied fighter, suddenly understood a new level of risk. And then there was the firepower. 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all in the nose, meant no convergence problem and enormous hitting power on a single pass. Head-on, frontal, or boom and zoom attacks from a P-38 were savage by design. Intelligence reports began to accumulate. Japanese officers compared notes, range figures, climb and dive behavior, and, crucially, how the Lightning was used. It wasn't simply that the P-38 could fly farther. It consistently escorted bombers on deep-range missions. It performed long reconnaissance runs, and it launched lethal, fast strikes against isolated targets. For a military that prized operational economy, the right plane, used in the right role, the Lightning's versatility was unsettling. It could escort, raid, and scout at distances that exposed Japanese rear areas. For the first time, home waters and supply lines felt vulnerable to air attack from aircraft that wouldn't easily be chased down. One event crystallized Japanese concern in a way no paper report could: the death of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The mission to shoot down Yamamoto was executed by P-38s and struck at Japan's heart, strategically and psychologically. When news arrived that a high-ranking admiral had been killed by a US interception using long-range P-38s, it confirmed a fear that had been simmering in intelligence circles. The Allies could reach into areas previously considered safe. For Japanese commanders, that was more than an aircraft problem. It was a strategic failure with operational consequences. The P-38 had demonstrated that range plus precise planning could kill leadership and paralyze planning. The Japanese reaction then split into 2 tracks: tactical adaptation and doctrinal worry. Tactically, pilots were instructed to avoid head-on or high-speed passes against Lightnings. They favored group tactics and ambushes that exploited maneuverability at low altitude. Night operations, dispersion, and camouflaged flight paths became more common. Anti-aircraft defenses were realigned to focus on choke points where P-38s had to pass. But these were local fixes. The underlying problem was larger: a mismatch between the Japanese training and industrial base and the kind of sustained long-range air war the P-38 helped enable. There were also technical observations in Japanese reports that deserve attention. Pilots noted the P-38's turbo superchargers gave it superior high-altitude performance. In the thin air where many intercepts were attempted, the Lightning retained power and control while single-engine Japanese fighters weakened. The concentrated nose armament meant that a single accurate pass could strip an enemy's wings or set a bomber aflame, and the twin engines offered redundancy: the ability to limp home after serious damage, which changed the calculus of risk in combat. These were not mere technical curiosities, they were operational multipliers. Still, Japan did not surrender to fatalism. Engineers and tacticians worked on counters. Propaganda and training manuals began to include P-38 dossiers, describing its strengths and, crucially, its weaknesses. Japanese pilots learned that the Lightning had vulnerabilities. poorer agility in tight turns, a larger radar and infrared signature when cluttered with external stores, and higher fuel consumption at extreme ranges that limited loiter time. The Japanese sought to exploit these, lure P-38s into low-speed engagements, force them into tight turns, or bait them into overextending their range. In some battles, these tactics worked. Skilled Japanese pilots could and did shoot down Lightnings, but success was uneven and often costly. Another important aspect was perception back home. The appearance of the P-38 in theater had effects beyond operational reports. It influenced morale, propaganda, and the broader narrative of the war. Where once Allied fighters were seen as limited and replaceable, the Lightning symbolized industrial reach and technological depth. Aircraft designed not just to fight, but to integrate into long logistical chains, into carrier operations, and into combined arms planning. For the Japanese public and military planners, the Lightning was a visible marker that the enemy could innovate in ways Japan struggled to match as the war stretched resources thin. By mid-war, Japanese intelligence had developed a more nuanced appraisal. The P-38 was not supernatural. It was formidable where it counted. Range, firepower, and pilot protection. It was less intimidating in close-in dogfights, and it had maintenance needs and operational constraints that, if attacked correctly, could be exploited. But nuance arrived after damage had been done. The P-38 had already reshaped how battles were fought across the Pacific, and in many cases, it forced Japanese units to divert resources to defend supply lines, adjust airfield locations, and protect convoys in ways they had not anticipated. Let's pause and untangle a human story to make this specific. Imagine a young Japanese pilot, newly assigned to a unit near Guadalcanal. He has flown many sorties against single-engine US fighters and feels confident in his aircraft's maneuverability. One morning, his squadron is scrambled to intercept a group of incoming P-38s probing at high altitude. He climbs to meet them, expecting the usual dance. Instead, he encounters concentrated bursts from a nose-mounted cannon and several .50 caliber impacts that tear through a wing. One of his comrades is forced down, but survives because the P-38 was hit and kept flying on one engine. The young pilot returns shaken. The textbooks no longer match the sky. That pilot's report becomes a case study in his unit, and the lesson spreads. Treat the Lightning with respect. What came next was a gradual, expensive strategic correction. Japan tried to develop better interceptors and to increase pilot training that emphasized energy tactics and teamwork. But the time and industrial strain required to birth and field new fighters at scale were immense. Meanwhile, the Allies kept refining the Lightning. Tweaks to engines, avionics, and armament that preserved its advantages while solving early teething problems. The P-38 evolved as a system, aircraft plus logistics, radar support, and pilot doctrine. That system-level superiority is what Japanese intelligence had eventually to admit they had underestimated. There's an uncomfortable truth that the Japanese assessments later acknowledged in confidential reports. The problem was not only machines, but the industrial model. A P-38 is powerful because of engines, manufacturing quality, and the ability to field replacements and spares. When your own factories are stressed, when fuel and materials dwindle, technical elegance becomes brittle. The P-38 exploited that brittleness. It didn't merely score tactical victories, it magnified strategic pressure on Japan's economy and logistics, and that, more than any single battle, was what Japan feared most. Finally, consider legacy. The P-38 surprised Japan because it represented a different approach to air power. Redundancy, firepower concentrated in the nose, and operational range combined with tactical flexibility. Japan's experience with the Lightning forced doctrinal changes and contributed to the painful realization that in modern war, aircraft are nodes in industrial and logistical networks, not isolated dueling machines. That shift in thinking echoes today. Air power is shaped not just by design, but by sustainment, doctrine, and the ability to project force where and when it matters. So what is the shocking truth Japan learned? It's not a simple headline. The real shock was systemic. Not only had they underestimated a single aircraft, they had underestimated what that aircraft represented. An industrialized, doctrine-driven approach to air warfare that could reach, strike, and return with precision. The P-38 was a tool, and the tool exposed weaknesses in a military that had relied on agility, sacrifice, and localized advantage. Once Japan recognized that reality, the game changed. But by then, the Lightning had already done much of its work. Imagine, for a last image, a Pacific dawn, low clouds, over a convoy. In the distance, two silhouettes approach, forked tails glinting in the morning sun. For the sailors below, those silhouettes are not curiosities. They are harbingers of a new, colder calculus of survival. One where distance, speed, and concentrated fire decide who lives, who flees, and who pays the price for a miscalculation. If you stay to the end, you now have more than a story about strange shapes in the sky. You have the anatomy of a strategic surprise, how technology, doctrine, and industry converge to create an advantage, and how misreading that combination can be as lethal as any bullet.